Clint Eastwood stood alone in the dusty Main Street, duster coat billowing gently in the morning wind. His revolver was holstered but ready, not because he wanted a fight, but because men like Judge Crane never gave up power without one. Across from him, the judge emerged from the courthouse steps, flanked by the sheriff and a couple of hired guns with itchy fingers and hollow eyes. The same men who once terrorized this town under the guise of law. "You think truth makes you righteous?" the judge spat. "You think these sheep will follow a drifter instead of order?" Clint didn't flinch. "I think they've seen what order really means in your hands." Then something happened. Doors creaked open. Windows unlatched. And slowly, the townspeople of Dunewood stepped out, not with torches or pitchforks, but with their presence. Quiet, strong, united. The blacksmith, the teacher, the mother of the boy Red once saved from drowning, the saloon girl standing. Front and center, chin held high. They lined the streets, wordless but undeniable. Not one of them reached for a weapon. They didn't need to, because the message was clear. They were done being ruled by fear. The sheriff, seeing the tide turn, looked at Clint, then at the people, then dropped his badge to the ground. "I didn't sign up to shoot at neighbors." The judge's eyes narrowed. Rage flared. He reached for his coat, and for a breath, it looked like Dunewood would echo with gunfire. But Clint was faster. In one fluid motion, he drew and fired, a single shot. The judge's hand jerked back, his gun clattered to the ground. The bullet hadn't killed him, just stopped him. "You'll get your trial now," Clint said coldly. The kind Red Calhoun never got. And just like that, the spell was broken. The judge was shackled with the very chains he'd once ordered for others. His men, now leaderless, backed down without a fight. The people began to move, organizing, speaking, reclaiming. Not just their land, their dignity. As the sun rose higher, Clint stood at the edge of town, looking back only once. He didn't need applause. He didn't need thanks. Justice, to him, wasn't about fame or glory. It was about making things right. One town at a time. And with that, he mounted his horse and rode on, his shadow long and righteous against the golden light of morning. The air was heavy inside the Weymouth State Penitentiary, not just with the stench of rust and sweat, but with something colder. Something final. Marshal Frank Callahan, tall, silent, carved from granite, stood in the viewing chamber outside. The death row execution room. The man strapped to the chair wasn't just another convict. His name was Raymond "Red" Calhoun, a farmhand accused of murdering a judge's daughter in a dusty frontier town 3 years ago. The case had been closed quickly. Too quickly, but something in Clint's gut never sat right. He'd arrested Red himself, under orders. The town wanted blood, and he delivered it. Until now, he'd told himself justice had been served. Until Red opened his mouth. As the final seconds ticked down, Red's eyes locked onto Clint's through the glass, wild but lucid. His voice cracked through the silence. "I didn't kill her, Marshal. You know that. That town you protect, it sold its soul a long time ago. You just didn't look hard enough." Then, the switch was pulled. The room fell still. But Clint couldn't move, couldn't look away. Something about Red's words hit a nerve he didn't know was still alive. The girl's father had been Judge Silas Moreland, a powerful man in the town of Dunewood, where justice was fast, public, and often profitable. Too profitable. That night, Clint sat alone in his dimly lit cabin. The whiskey didn't burn like it used to. The file on Red Calhoun lay open in front of him, grainy photos, witness statements, timelines that never quite fit. Frank stared into the fire, haunted by the memory of Red's last look, not of fear, but of bitter, righteous truth. Maybe the law made a mistake. The thought chilled him more than the mountain air. And so for the first time in decades, Marshal Callahan packed a bag. Not for duty, but for answers. The town of Dunewood hadn't changed much on the outside. It still sat stubbornly beneath. The western sun, a mix of dust, clapboard porches, and painted smiles. But to Clint Eastwood's sharp eyes, it looked more like a polished coffin now. As Marshal Frank Callahan rode into town on his black stallion, every step echoed down Main Street like a warning shot. Shopkeepers paused. Deputies squinted from behind window blinds. The air buzzed with quiet recognition and fear. He hadn't been here since Red Calhoun's conviction. 3 years ago, the town had thrown a parade when he handed Red over. Now, nobody met his gaze for long. Something had shifted. The sheriff's office was first. Sheriff Ben Harlan, younger and newly appointed, greeted Clint with a forced grin. Well, damn. If it isn't the Iron Marshal himself. What brings you back to our little corner of peace? Frank didn't smile. I'm reopening the Calhoun case. The smile disappeared from Ben's face like blood draining from a wound. The case is closed, Marshal. You were here. You testified. It's done. Frank stepped closer, voice calm but slicing like a knife. The man died with a lie in his mouth, and lies don't rest easy. From there, Clint went to work like a ghost from the past. He visited the rundown shack where Red had lived and found old sketches hidden under the floorboards. Drawings of the judge's daughter, gentle and innocent, not the crazed stalker the town had claimed she feared. He tracked down Ella May, a saloon girl who had testified against Red. Now older and ridden with guilt, she confessed over tears and trembling fingers. Red didn't do it. The judge paid us all off, said if we didn't help bury him, he'd bury us. Clint's jaw clenched. His fingers drummed the handle of his revolver, the same one he hadn't drawn in months. His blood boiled, but his voice remained still. Who else knew? Ella May wiped her eyes and whispered, everyone who matters in this town. That night, Clint sat alone again, but not in silence. The town's corruption was whispering now, from every alley, every polished suit, every friendly handshake. He finally understood what Red had meant. The town didn't just let injustice happen. It profited from it, and Clint knew what he had to do. The next morning, Clint Eastwood's boots thudded with purpose across the wooden floor of the Dunewood Courthouse, a grand old building that stood like a cathedral of corruption. The white columns gleamed in the sun, but to Clint, they looked like bones bleaching under a lie. Inside, Judge Bald Crane sat in his chambers, sipping bourbon from a crystal glass, as if justice could be swallowed and forgotten. He was once respected, now feared. Rumor had it he never needed to raise his voice, only an eyebrow, to silence opposition. And yet, when Clint stepped in, the air thickened. Crane didn't rise. He just stared through his spectacles, his voice smooth as oil on water. Frank Callahan, the town's living legend. What brings a gun to my desk? Clint didn't waste time. He dropped the sketches, the saloon girl's written confession, and a folded page from the original court records onto the judge's desk. You paid witnesses. You buried evidence. You sent an innocent man to hang. And you knew it. The judge's hand paused mid-air, hovering over his glass. For the first time in years, the mask cracked. A twitch. A shadow behind the eyes. You don't understand. Marshal, Red Calhoun was a firebrand. He stirred people up. He wanted to fix things that didn't need fixing. So yes, I removed a thorn, for the greater good. Clint's eyes narrowed. The greater good doesn't start with a noose. Judge Crane's face hardened like stone. You want to destroy this town? Over one man's last words? You think people want the truth, Callahan. They want comfort, control, order. You dig too deep, and all you'll find is blood. There it was, the threat behind the words. Subtle, surgical, and sharp. And still Clint didn't flinch. Maybe, but I gave my word to a dying man. And unlike this town, I keep my word. He turned to leave, but stopped as the door creaked open and 2 armed deputies stepped in, guns loose in their holsters, eyes sharp with warning. Crane spoke without looking at them. Escort the marshal to the edge of town. If he turns back, make sure it's his last ride." Clint stared at them for a long beat, then walked out, slow and steady, his spurs ringing like the countdown to war. Outside, the wind picked up. Papers flew from the judge's desk as if justice itself had grown restless. Frank Callahan had uncovered the truth, and now, the whole town was against him. But that was just fine, because Clint never needed a crowd, just a cause. The sun set like fire over Dunewood, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. But beneath the silence, something was shifting, a storm gathering. In whispers and sideways glances, Clint Eastwood wasn't gone. He was still in town. And he wasn't hiding. Instead of leaving, Clint had taken up residence in the abandoned stable behind the old church, the one Red Calhoun used to preach from before he was hanged. It was poetic and deliberate. He began visiting people. One by one, the blacksmith who had forged the chains for Red's arrest. The saloon girl, now racked with guilt after years of silence. Even the undertaker, who had seen Red's body swing from the rope and muttered, "That man died too calm for someone guilty." Clint asked questions, showed them the judges, sealed files, played them the dying convict's voice on an old recorder, a scratchy, haunting confession of innocence. And something started to crack in Dunewood. The people had been asleep, drugged by comfort and fear. But now they were waking up. A quiet anger bloomed in the baker's wife, a clenched jaw in the town tailor. People stopped tipping their hats to the sheriff. Doors closed when the judge passed by. Then Clint lit the fuse. He posted a notice on Coastpost. The saloon wall. Public trial. Tomorrow at sundown. Let's see who the real criminals are. The sheriff laughed when he heard. He's got no court, no power, no jury. But he was wrong, because when Clint stood in front of the old church, the next evening, half the town showed up. Not for a fight, but for the truth. Clint took the makeshift pulpit, holding Red's sketchbook high. This man was hanged for telling the truth. And every name in this book had a hand in killing him, or in staying silent while it happened. Gasps echoed. Faces turned pale. Some looked away, but others stood taller. And then came the moment Clint had planned for, the witness. The saloon girl stepped forward, voice trembling, and said it aloud. "Red Calhoun didn't attack me. He helped me. He was trying to stop Judge Crane from selling half this town to a railroad company." The crowd shifted like a wave. All eyes turned to the judge, who stood at the edge, arms folded, eyes burning. "Marshal," he said calmly, "you've made your point, but you've also stirred a hornet's nest." Clint's voice was steel. "Good, let's see who gets stung." By the end of the night, the town was no longer silent. They were angry, not just at the judge, but at themselves for letting it happen. The seeds of justice had been planted, but the reckoning? That was coming at sunrise. The first rays of dawn broke over Dunewood, cutting through the morning fog like judgment itself. The church bell rang once, twice, a sound the town hadn't heard in years. But this time, it wasn't for a wedding. It wasn't for mourning. It was for reckoning.